Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Today's investors expect more than a transaction. They want a relationship. Show how your firm merges EQ and IQ with Orion's V-Fi 20, a new shareable assessment developed by Dr. Daniel Crosby that provides you with emotional and attitudinal insights into clients to facilitate more meaningful investing conversations from day one. Get started today at orion.com/B-Fi20.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and today I am joined by return guest Neil Bage, co-founder of the excellent behavioral finance consultancy Shaping Wealth. He is an applied behavioral science and neuroeconomics aficionado, and I must say, a really great tour guide to the city of London. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Oh, Daniel, it is great to be back. I still think and talk about the day we spent, me, you, and Charlotte, walking around London. It was such fun. I hope we get the chance to do it again.
Oh, I do too, man. I swear, this is embarrassing to admit, but I had been to London previously and I didn't love it. Like I was like, it's fine. Like I just hadn't had the right person to show it to me, because I can honestly say I loved it after I had, sort of a skilled tour guide. So I think there's probably a lesson in that. Sometimes we're quick to poo-poo something or write it off, and maybe we just need to do a deeper dive.
Yeah, but you know what, Daniel, as well as, and I know this isn't what the purpose of this podcast interview is about, but, the thing is, when you go to a city as a tourist, right, you tend to just do the main things that everybody else is doing. So in London, Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, the Thames, all of the things. But what you and I did and Charlotte did is we used our legs and we just spent the entire day walking around London, and we saw things that tourists just wouldn't see, but are the very fabric of what makes London, London. And I think that just helps, it helps, right? So yeah, it was a great day.
Absolutely unforgettable. Can't thank you enough for that. So Neil is a certified good dude, as you can tell him, walking me and my daughter, I think 27,000 steps around London that day. I think that she still talks about how much her legs hurt, but it was all worth it. But as a certified good dude, we're going to talk about advisor wellness today, and I think this is a topic that doesn't perhaps get enough of a good look. We're going to talk about how financial advisors can take care of themselves en route to taking care of their clients. But I want to start with something I know that you have some opinions on and have done a lot of thinking on. And it's an idea that I first encountered in my psychotherapeutic training, and it's this idea that some humanistic psychotherapists have. It's the idea that we can only take our clients as far as we have gone ourselves, and that we must sort of quote unquote do our own work first. Now, first of all, do you believe that? I mean, can we take our clients further than we've gone ourselves? And what does doing the work look like in the context of a financial professional?
Oh, wow. Nice, easy question to start, Daniel. Thank you for that. You are so kind to that. If that's what being kind is, man, I never want to get on your bad side. So I think it's important to understand what we mean by doing our own work, right? Before we get into the specifics of what it means for financial professionals. So let's get everybody on the same page, right? So, for me, when we refer to doing our own work, it kind of means that we need to focus, and it's really important to focus on our own emotional and psychological needs and issues before we even think about helping others with theirs. But and this, that can actually be quite a deep and challenging process, right? But in essence, I think we need to explore and resolve. And that's a really important word, resolve, our own issues and challenges and our own limitations, so that we can become more self-aware and, I guess, more importantly, emotionally stable. Then we can help other people work through their stuff. But, one more point on this before I answer specifically about financial professionals. And I say this from a place of experience. It's only when we work through our own issues and we have a a deeper, more meaningful understanding of ourselves, that we can actually be more empathetic and less judgmental of other people. And then we can help them see the world differently. Now, let's flip this into the world we work in, financial services. So what does doing the work mean in relation to that? Well, it's kind of the same thing, but more of a focus on helping or addressing our own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors around money before we can effectively help our clients address their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors around money. So let's make this really interesting, right? Because actually a way of doing that is by exploring your own money story and identify any of those emotional blocks or issues that you have towards money. And by the way, that does mean going quite deep and addressing some long-held beliefs. And if we use a movie kind of phrase, it's like an origins story. But I'll say this, and everything that I've just said, it's easier said than done. Self-reflection, personal growth, introspection, they are really hard things to do. But in my opinion, and in all fairness, my experience, they are absolutely crucial to maintaining a healthy relationship with money and providing the best support that we can to our clients. And sorry, Daniel, one more thing before I stop talking. And this is to do with personal growth, because I think this is important. As financial professionals, we also need to be continuously updating our knowledge and our skills. Kind of understanding the latest research and trends, further education, attending conferences, listening to podcasts. You're welcome. Basically professional development, because they are all part of a growth mindset. And I think that is a key component in our ability to flourish, both personally and then to help other people flourish.
Yeah, so I'll sort of tell on myself. I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend, and we were talking about a mutual friend, and the friend I was speaking to said, "Hey, why does this friend engage in XYZ behavior? Like why do you think they do this thing?" That was sort of puzzling to her. And I said, "Oh, that makes perfect sense in context because of ABC thing this person's been through, and like." When you understand their whole story, it actually makes a ton of sense and sort of here's why. And so she said, wow, that really fits. I think you're right on. And she said, what's sort of the parallel in your life? What's sort of the story behind why you do the things that you do? And I was like, let me get back to you. And it was like one of those moments, and it was actually around a financial consideration. And it was one of those moments where I was like, man, like we really can see each other better than we can see ourselves. And
that's right.
We really do just have so much more clarity, and it's just much easier. Like it's very easy for me to make an off the cuff observation about a friend of mine and why they spend money the way that they do. It's very different for me to kind of like turn that back on myself and examine myself. And I sort of said to this friend, I'm like, look, give me a day or two. And like, I owe you a response because I got to like figure this out. This is crazy that I got that sort of, nonplussed by this question. And it really is just a testament to the difficulty of doing our own work, I think.
It's really difficult. It's very easy to sit in judgment of other people. It's incredibly difficult to sit in judgment of yourself. It's a skill that I have been working on for a long, long time. Have I perfected it? Absolutely not. Do I think I'll ever perfect it? Absolutely not. I'm constantly learning about who I am and my place in the world and how I interact with other human beings, how I behave. And it's really hard. It's hard work to say, or to recognize a behavior in yourself that could be, damaging or could be self-sabotaging. It's really easy to look at someone and say, eat the salad while you're shoving a quarter pounder in your face. It's easy. And so part of what we're talking about here today is recognizing that in order to be, in order for wellness and flourishing and thriving to be part of your life, you need to do some hard work.
Yeah. Well, I think it requires curiosity, because my observation about my friend wasn't a judgment. It was just sort of like, why do they spend money in the way that they do, was sort of the question that was posed to me.
Right.
And the answer was like, oh no, this makes sense. And it wasn't a judgment or anything. But I think sometimes when we look back on ourselves, we take a judgmental stance, and we all have a vested interest in seeing ourselves as being good, smart, pious, good friends, whatever. And I think there's judgment associated with all of those things. And I think if we can just have more curiosity and less judgment about our own behavior, then we're in a much better place to see why we do the things that we do.
Completely agree.
So sort of keeping with this topic, I want to talk about Carl Jung's idea of a wounded healer. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of just what it sounds like. It's this idea that oftentimes those in helping professions are drawn to these very professions because of their own stories and their own wounds. And I mean, I would be when people ask me why I went into psychology, it's like, well, because I was trying to figure myself out. And like, that is true of every psychologist you talk to. I mean, there's no one in this field who's well-adjusted, Neil. It just doesn't happen. Like, we're just trying to make sense of this mess between my ears.
Yeah.
So the idea here would be in our world that someone with a history of financial trauma may feel called to help others deal with the same. In terms of telling our own story, sharing our own hurts, how can we walk the line between being vulnerable and human and approachable by giving glimpses into our own story without making the time with a client all about us?
Man, you ask good questions. Look, you've just said something really important here, or two words of great importance. And those two words are helping profession. I think we sometimes forget that we are all in a helping profession. We help other human beings plan for the life they want. We help them along the way. We deal with any stumbles or falls. So when it comes to financial well-being, we are the helpers. Now, and that's important to recognize, because if you look at the other forms of well-being, physical, spiritual, emotional, there are institutionalized and legitimate helpers available to us, doctors, clergy, therapists, or counselors. So when it comes to financial well-being, I stress this point, we are the helpers, right? So to your question, and I'm a sucker for anything Carl Jung, so I know that's why you put it in here, right? So I get that people can be drawn to helping roles due to their own experiences and personal struggles and adversity. That's why, by the way, exploring your own money story is so important, because it gives you the framework to be able to address some deep-rooted challenges. But even though telling our stories or bringing our stories into our profession can give us a unique understanding and empathy, it's also really important to be mindful about how we share our stories with our clients. Now, if I think of my own experience of spending time in a vulnerable place, talking about my deepest challenges, I think there are 3 things that I've experienced that I think can help make conversations about clients and not about us. Right, so which one's first? The first one, I guess, is to set boundaries and guidelines about how and what we share about ourselves. If we're trying to help other people, then yes, I get it. Sharing a personal story might be appropriate in the context of building kind of empathy or rapport, but it's really important that we keep the focus on the client and their needs. Second, actually, maybe this one should have been first. You ask yourself, why are you sharing? Before you share any personal experience with a client, right, you need to consider why and what you're sharing in the first place and how that might benefit the client. Yes, you might help them, that's true, but there's always a risk that you sharing one of your stories can kind of inadvertently shift the focus onto you rather than them. And that's never a great place to be. And I guess the third thing, which actually this one should have been number one, consciously focus on the client. The purpose of sharing our personal experiences is to help other people feel understood and supported. And so it's really important to keep the focus on the client's needs and experiences and avoid using our personal stories as a way to draw attention to us and kind of our struggles. So I guess, maybe what I should have just said was, focus on the client and be conscious of what and why you're sharing something. I mean, that's a much shorter answer. Maybe I should have gone with that.
It's amazing how saying something out loud can help you think through it real time. But I think you've done a great job. And at the core of it is, like you just said, it's a client focus and it's a focus on why. Because I was taking notes during what you were saying, and it's like, yeah, you've got to have a reason. I think these sort of unresolved pieces of us, these stories that we tell compulsively because we want empathy, or we want to be heard, or we want to be understood, or we want to be listened to, they can kind of leak out of us. I think, they can kind of leak out of us inadvertently, and that may or may not be in the client's best interest. But if we take the 3-part approach that you're talking about, be cognizant of their needs, focus on the why, make sure there's a purpose behind it.
Yeah,
I think it can do a lot to knit two people together. There's this great research on who we like, right? So unsurprisingly, there's research on we like to do business with people we like people who are like us. And, one of the ways that you can prove you're like someone is sort of bonding around a shared struggle. And yet, if you introduce it at the wrong time, it's dismissive. The easiest example I can think of is when my sister-in-law passed away about 5 years ago. It's like just watching people interact with my wife was so fascinating and sort of maddening, because people would say stuff like, they would learn that her sister died, and it was like they would immediately jump in with their own story about, someone they had lost, and to a person they meant well. It's like, yeah, she lost her sister a week ago. They don't need to,
That's right.
She doesn't need to hear about Aunt Mabel right now. Like, this is, she needs love and empathy and a listening ear. And I think it has so much potential to bring two people together. But if misapplied, I think it can be, more harmful than good.
No, that's right. And the way that the human brain works, and me, this is what I've studied for a long, long time. The way the human brain works is, we process sound waves. So you are listening to my voice now. Your brain is processing those sound waves. And there's 2 parts of the brain, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, that are kind of doing 2 things. One is listening, and one is formulating a response. And that means that as a human, we are always listening with an intent to reply. And the secret is to prevent the brain from triggering a response, a verbal response. It's to allow the brain to process the sound, think about what you're hearing, pause, and know when and what to say. And sometimes, like in your wife's case, she says, "Oh, I've just lost my sister." We're listening with an intent to reply, and that reply might be, "Oh, I lost my sister." And when you go there, you can't help but say, "And now let me tell you how I felt, how I dealt with this, what I went through." And actually, you're right. All people want to know is, "Oh, I lost my sister. I understand what you're going through. If you want to talk about it, I'm here." Mm-hmm. They just want to know that you're there, right? And you're right. There's a time and a place to share our stories, but part of it means that we have to address the very human part of always listening with an intent to reply. The skill is being able to consciously pause and stop yourself talking when, and only speak when the time is right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that breakdown of the 2 parts of our brain. And we're wired like that because usually that's the right thing to do. Like, if you're in conversation with someone, it's like, hey, look, a quick response, a quick listen, a quick response. That's exactly what the doctor ordered. Yeah. But in these high stakes situations, when you're discussing something as sensitive as money, when you're discussing life and death and all the things that financial planners are called on to discuss, this natural reflexive action can lead us down a bad path. So I love that. let's turn our attention now to taking care of advisors. You talked earlier about how important it is that we realize that this is a helping profession. And I think I want to put an even finer point on that, put an exclamation point after it, because I think in other professions, psychotherapy, medical doctors, things like that, there's an understanding that the work is inherently stressful, that things like empathy fatigue, things like emotional contagion, like all of these things are present in that work. And because there's a realization of that, there are measures put in place to kind of be off ramps for that. When I was a therapist, I had to have my own therapist. That was just sort of an institutional mandate. Mm-hmm. There was a real recognition that, like, look, your job is hard and you're going to need someone to talk to about all the people that you are talking to.
Yeah.
I don't think a similar recognition exists in our profession. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that's borne out in some of the research that we're going to talk about, because a 2022 study by FPA found that 63% of investors were experiencing high or moderate amounts of stress. Okay, we get it. But this is what's wild. The number among financial advisors was 71%. So I'm curious to know from you, what are the most common sources of stress for financial advisors? And what is the fallout of stressed advisors trying to comfort stressed clients?
You know what? Let's start this one by addressing the elephant in the room, right? A lot of the time, even when we work in a big organization with hundreds of people, it can feel lonely. And a point I want to make here, Daniel, and you'll know this, loneliness doesn't mean being alone. It means being disconnected. It's about psychological isolation. And for the psych geeks who are listening to this, that's like the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's so important. We want to feel connected, and loneliness can make us feel disconnected. So, people, advisors, and I talk to advisors all over the world daily, and this is echoed in those conversations. Advisors are feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Think of what we've been through as a collective species over the last few years, right? No one is immune from this stuff. And then on top of that, advisors have to deal with stuff like market volatility, regulatory changes, client demands, business targets. It's hard work. And you know what? It can sometimes feel like it's you versus the world. I get that. And I know the statement that I'm about to make is obvious, and yet I'm going to make it anyway. Financial advisors are human beings too. They're not immune. They can't be immunized from their own personal stresses, relationships, health issues, children, home life. It's really hard. And there's a brilliant quote from Richard Thaler when he says, "People aren't dumb, the world is hard." And that's a great kind of quote to sum up what I've just kind of said. But, this can have far-reaching implications. We know this from mental health research that when we're stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, burned out, it impacts our ability to help other people. We know that we communicate less effectively, and we know that it impacts the way that we make decisions. But I think the most important thing the research shows us is that it makes us unhappy. So to your question specifically, the fallout of stressed advisors trying to comfort stressed clients, well, that's a significant challenge, right? The chance of unintentionally transferring their own stress onto a client has to be pretty high. So an already stressed client gets another dose of anxiety and uncertainty. But I said this already, right? I've studied the human brain for a long time, and we know that in a state of stress, especially when our sympathetic nervous system is triggered, we struggle to maintain objectivity. We become overly emotional, and that can seep into the advice that we give, which, worst case scenario, it could impact trust and confidence in relationships. So I guess, like my first answer, It's really important for advisors to prioritize their own self-care and well-being. And, that's why it's Shaping Wealth. We run advisor well-being workshops. Advisor well-being is a priority for us. It is so important. But it starts by advisors consciously prioritizing and taking time out to focus on their self-care, their well-being, their mental health.
Yeah, I think it takes, I just want to reiterate, I think it takes what you said at the outset, viewing this and understanding that this is in fact a helping profession. A lot of our power lies in our ability to be that listening ear and that empathetic ear. And so when we understand that 80%, give or take, of what gets communicated in a session with a client is nonverbal, and we understand that 70-something% of advisors were stressed out last year, I do think it becomes imperative that we look at ourselves and say, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing for sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, wellness? Because there's no chance that if advisors are this stressed, it's not getting passed on to clients in some meaningful way that's going to hurt client outcomes.
Right. Exactly right.
So one more bit on this that's even perhaps more concerning. This is a 2013 study done by a friend of the show, Sonia Luter, and her colleague Brad Klontz. And they found that 93% of the 56 planners they surveyed bore psychological symptoms consistent with medium to high levels of post-traumatic stress, and that 39% experienced severe stress on the level of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this was specifically coming out of the Great Financial Crisis, talking about their experiences during the Great Financial Crisis. So, like you said, I spoke to a reporter recently who was asking why people were so stressed about their money. And I was like, well, look at the run we've had, right? We went from COVID to a war in Europe, the first war in Europe in a generation, to now the constant talk of recession and the worry about what the next shoe to drop with that. And it just seems like, an advisor who has a 40 or 50 year career, if we think that there's like a true bear market, every 5 to 7 years on average, I mean, an advisor with any kind of a career is going to live through 5 or 10 really, really tough scenarios that have the potential to elicit clinical levels of stress and anxiety in them. What are some practical tips you have for helping advisors to manage this kind of stress?
The thing that struck me, Daniel, as you were asking me that question was, isn't that a really sad statistic? Now, it breaks my heart, genuinely, to know that our colleagues, in the broadest sense, are struggling so much that it would be classified as kind of pseudo PTSD. It saddens me. It really does, But it's why it's so important for financial advisors to do what they can to manage stress and consciously focus on their own mental health. Right now, let me mention Carl Jung again. Right. So one of my favorite Jung quotes is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So in that vein, I'm suggesting that we need to consciously think about our mental health, what's impacting us, what's triggering us, and then consider what we might need to do proactively and consciously, to make the necessary changes. But allow me to show a bit of vulnerability here, okay? Personal vulnerability. I went through counseling for a period of time. And first off, it was the best thing I've ever done. It's not for everybody, and I get that. But for me, it worked wonders. And going through that process every week, there were 3 concepts. Is that the right word? Mental models, frameworks, whatever the word is, right? There were 3 things that really, really helped me out that I still kind of practice today. which goes back to your question: what practical steps can advisors take to help manage stress? This is what works for me. I'm not going to say it works for everybody, but it works for me. The first one was I had to learn how to recognize when I was stressed. I had to recognize my Neil is stressed symptoms. Headaches, eye migraines, stomach upsets, fatigue, as well as those real powerful emotional symptoms like anxiety and irritability. I spent and continue to spend a lot of time working on myself to be able to recognize and name those feelings. And man, it has been so helpful. I also practice self-care, though I know I could be a ton better at that. And I mean things like exercise, meditation, going for walks with Sandy, my wife, and our dog Archie. Basically doing the things I need to recharge the batteries, which, we know helps reduce stress. And I think this last point is one that I think was the hardest thing for me to do, but by far has been the most beneficial, was I went and looked for professional support. I went and looked for the helper. And don't get me wrong, I have an amazing network of friends and family. Your listeners will also have an amazing network of colleagues, friends, family. But in addition to that, and this is the path that I chose, we also have access to well-trained, non-judgmental mental health professionals who, and this was very true for me, help you see the world in a clearer way and kind of help you join the dots. And just as I'm thinking on my feet here, I said 3 things. Actually, I can think of a 4th one that's just popped into my head, which I really struggle with, if I'm being honest. And you can ask my wife and she'll confirm this, and it's to set boundaries. I kind of mentioned this one earlier on. This is the one that my wife Sandy tells me about all the time, that it's really important for us to set boundaries around our work. And that's mainly to prevent burnout. And where I fall down is limiting my work hours. I don't take enough breaks during the day, and I am shocking at taking time off when I need to. But, and it's an important but, I'm getting better at it. And I am consciously working on that. So there's 4 things, recognizing what's going on with your mind and body, practice self-care, set boundaries, and if you need to, speak to a financial professional. And, Daniel, let me finish by saying this, right? So I think this is an important place to leave this question. There are people out there who are willing and able to come alongside you and support you. It takes incredible strength to step forward and ask for help, even though asking for help is still stigmatized and seen as a weakness. But know this, and I'm sure, Daniel, you'll support this statement. Accepting that you are overwhelmed, anxious, stressed, feeling lonely or disconnected, these are perfectly normal human feelings, and every one of us struggles at some point, and it takes courage to step forward and admit that. That is a strength, and we should be creating space for people who have the courage to step forward and support them with open arms and an open heart.
It's beautifully put, Neil, and I've had the same experience the times that I've been in therapy. Is just it raises every part of my life, and especially my relationships. And in addition to what you just said about the bravery that's inherent in seeking this kind of help, I would echo that 100%. I would also, have a bit of a reframe, which is I would say therapy is valuable for financial professionals who don't feel especially stressed and anxious as well, because you learn, you witness new ways of listening. You witness a professional listen and react in new and profound ways. You learn things about yourself that will help you with your clients. So I wouldn't, certainly if you're acutely stressed or anxious, it's a great suggestion, but I would say don't wait, don't even wait for the moment where you're in a bad place. I would say there's a ton of good to be had today for what we used to call in the profession sort of the worried well, right? So, people who are high functioning, doing great things, but just want exposure to sort of a new way of thinking and acting and listening. And I loved what you said, excuse me, I love what you said about recognition too. That's something I've come upon in my old age, is that, for me, there's so much stigma around stress and mental illness and anxiety and all the things we're talking about today, that a lot of times we kind of push it down. And for me, stress and worry manifest themselves physically far before they're ever sort of brought to my conscious awareness. My back will hurt, or like I won't be sleeping well, or something like that. And those, I've learned, are sort of your check engine light, early warning signs before you go, oh wow, like I'm not doing well.
Yeah. And you know what, Daniel, let me share a really quick story. Years and years ago, and I don't mind sharing the story, right? People who know me like you know this part of my life. In 2008, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, and she's fine. She got through that, thankfully, and everything is fine. During that period of time, I would be asked by people, how are you doing, Neil? And me being the kind of the stoic husband, the British stiff upper lip mentality, I would say, I'm all right. I'm dealing with this, actually. Thank you. And I know you're there if I need support. Thank you. I think I've got this. One day I woke up and I had these kind of this red rash across my knuckles and my kneecaps. And I'm thinking, oh, what's that? That's a bit strange. Go and see a doctor. And she says to me, how are you doing? And I went, yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. And she said, well, your body's telling me you're not, because what you've got is what's called pompholyx eczema. And it's an adult eczema that only comes out in extreme stress. Your body's telling me that you're highly stressed. So you can tell me all you want verbally, you're fine. I'm telling you, you're not. And if at that point I'd listened to those words, I would have gone and sought professional help at that point. It took me till the year 2022, and the reason why I went to see a counselor was initially triggered by grief. It took me that long. And then when I went there and started to unpack my story, you start realizing that, man, I could have done this and I should have done this a long, long, long time ago, when actually I genuinely felt I was fine, because here I am now having to unpack a ton of stuff. But Daniel, I hear what you're saying. For me, I feel lighter. I feel rebooted by going through that process. So I'm a massive advocate of looking for the helpers and using people to come alongside you and help you when you need it.
Thank you for sharing that story, Neil. I think it's a perfect example of the wisdom of the body and some of the ways that we can get these early warning signs and have to learn to see them. And I guess my hope is that as people listen to you and listen to this story, is that we can kind of take some of our own advice, because there are certainly DIY investors and there are people who sort of, poo-poo the idea of working with a financial planner or financial advisor. And we have great responses for that, right? We have great responses, and we can easily articulate the value of working with someone who is adept at these things and someone who's a professional in their sphere.
Right.
But I think when it comes to our own mental health and our own wellness, we're too quick to ignore our own advice, and we try and insource everything, and we try to keep that stiff upper lip, and we try and power through and not make other people feel uncomfortable by telling them, like, hey, my wife is sick and I'm not doing great.
Yeah.
And so I guess I hope we'll take our own advice, because we're so good at talking about why other people need our help. And I think we're much less good at recognizing when we need help ourselves.
Exactly right.
So, Neil, the last sort of formal question I have for you is, you are, if I had to think of a word to describe you, are you ready? Are you ready?
Be kind.
No, it's very kind. It's thoughtful. I think you're a very thoughtful person in every sense of the word. I think you're thoughtful and considerate about others and their feelings. But I think you're also thoughtful about our little world of behavioral finance and human first financial planning. So being the thoughtful person that you are, where do you think we're headed? Like, where will we be 5-10 years from now? I know we've talked in our private conversations about the groundswell of enthusiasm for this kind of work, the work that we both do. And I'm curious where you think it's headed in the next decade.
I think I'm excited to see, and mainly because it's been where my focus has been for the last 15 years, I'm excited to see where neuroscience continues to take us and what it continues to teach us. I think there is so much about the brain that we still don't know. And the more we learn, the more kind of aha moments we have. That's exciting, and I think the advances in neuroscience help us get rid of horrible words like irrational, which I despise, because it kind of gives us the evidence that we're not irrational, we're normal. And it also gives us the framework to kind of stop us overly focusing on biases as if it's something that we can fix. Spoiler alert, we can't. So brain science is showing us the way, and it's giving us some amazing answers to long-held questions, and I absolutely love that. So I'm excited to see where that takes us. I'm also latterly really, kind of excited and love seeing how the work that, was started by kind of Marty Seligman, the positive psychology movement. I'm interested to see how that develops. And actually, that's actually probably a great way to kind of tie a bow around this entire discussion, because one of the things I've been reading about recently, and this is incredibly timely that you asked this question, is what Marty Seligman calls post-traumatic growth. And it's his idea that we can experience positive change as a result of going through difficult experiences. And he wrote, and I can't remember where it was, but when I read it, I was kind of like, yes, that's it. He wrote that it's also not helpful to think of people as broken or damaged by their experiences. Instead, what we should do is consciously focus on the strengths and resilience that individuals have developed as a result of their experiences. And if we then work on those strengths, it's then that we can grow and we can thrive. And I really love that as a concept. I'm keen to see how that develops in all of or works its way into the work that we all do. And it just so happens to play into pretty much everything that we have talked about today.
Yeah. I love the idea of post-traumatic growth as well as Seligman's work broadly. I was with Tim Maurer. I know he's a friend of your organization. I was with Tim Maurer yesterday and co-presenting with him a couple of times, and it really struck me how the conversation in our little world has largely mirrored the growth of psychology broadly. Like, psychology began with the study of brokenness and brokenness and dysfunction. And indeed, the study of behavioral finance did the very same thing. Like the first thing that we did was we broke with traditional econometrics by cataloging all the ways that people were biased and sort of suboptimal. And that was, it's important to know those things. It's important to sort of avoid those derailers, if you will.
Yep.
But it's not as empowering as it could be. And it was, well over 100 years into the growth of psychology as a discipline that Seligman and others like him came along and introduced the study of not what makes us broken, but the study of what makes us whole, and the study of what makes us happy, and the study of what makes us love. And I see, your work, the work that you're doing at Shaping Wealth, the work I'm doing at Orion, I think is moving in the direction of how can we figure out what enough looks like? How can we help people flourish? How can we help them spend money in ways that make them happy? How can we tie money and meaning together? And I think ultimately that's a much more enriching conversation than cataloging all the ways we're screwed up and fallen.
I mean, yeah, Daniel, imagine two conversations. A conversation with a client where we tell them that, everything that they're experiencing, their emotions, the way they are navigating the world, their anxieties, their dreams, their aspirations, all those things are perfectly normal human responses to the world around them, right? Imagine that's one conversation. And then another conversation is to tell people that they're irrational, that they're biased, that their behavior is bad, and there's a better way of behaving. You can tell immediately just by the words I'm using, the responses of those clients. One client is going to say, "Oh, he understands me, he gets me." The other client is immediately going to go on the back foot in a defensive way and kind of go, "I'm not biased. I don't make bad decisions. I'm not irrational." And that's never a great place to start. So why I love Seligman's work so much and why we're fans of Shaping Wealth of his work is that it gives us a framework to accept that human beings are just normal. And the way we navigate the world is unique to us. And if sometimes that doesn't turn out great, it doesn't mean that we're irrational or we're poor decision makers. It just means that something we've done could have been done in a better way. And we learn by that, and we develop and we thrive and we adapt and all of those things. And so, approaching all of our relationships and our human interactions from a positive psychology standpoint, a viewpoint, whatever the correct word is, can only be a good thing because we meet other humans where they're at, and that place is called Normalville.
Yeah. I'm always looking for the name of the podcast. This is going to be called A Place Called Normalville.
Oh, man. I want to move there. I'm going to move there tomorrow. I love it.
Dude, I'm not allowed there. I was kicked out. Of Normalville long ago. We can't be neighbors. It's funny going back to what you just said. I think about, these surveys where they've said surveys of clients where it's asked things like, what are the different things an advisor does and how much do clients value them? And when they ask things like, helps keep me from making emotional, irrational decisions, no one endorses that, right? Like no clients endorse that as a value they want from their financial advisor. And that's why advisors shouldn't lead with that. And then some folks will go, look, clients don't want the behavioral stuff. But if you look at the top of those lists, it's things like helps me articulate and outline my goals and values, like helps, gives me peace of mind. Like that's behavioral finance too.
That's right.
We just have to frame it. We just have to frame it correctly. And I think when we frame it as a negative and frame people as so broken and fallible, they very naturally push back against that. So I think you're right on. So Neil, this has been awesome. It's always a pleasure to have an excuse to talk with a great buddy and a great thinker. If people want to learn more about your work and read your stuff, where can folks find you?
So you can follow me on Twitter. It's where I'm most active. I'm not a massive social media fan, but I'm on Twitter. So that's at Neil Bage. You can follow the work we're doing at Shaping Wealth, at Shaping Wealth, or by visiting our website, shapingwealth.com. Those are the places where I tend to hang out most.
Neil Bage, we'll see you in London soon.
Hope so. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.